This is Talk It Out, the Women's Agenda podcast. Tune in for your weekly download on the latest news, trends and ideas affecting your career or your business. Here's your host, Angela Priestley.
Hello and welcome to the Women's Agenda podcast. I am here in the studio, a new studio with Eagle Waves Radio. They've moved to a new office, new studio, which is very exciting. So we're here for the first time. It might sound a little bit different to usual. There's a few less background noises. I'm with, as always, our contributing editor on Women's Agenda, Georgie Dent. How are you, Georgie?
Very well. Happy to be here.
It's been a couple of weeks. I know, we had a little bit of a break. And our guest today is Shivani Gopal, the CEO of The Remarkable Woman. How are you, Shivani?
I am great, thank you, and equally excited to be here.
And so much to discuss, but we thought that talking the Q word, a bit of quotas, would help cover a lot of it, because that's the talk of a lot of things at the moment. So, favourite topic? Absolutely not. So quotas, do we need them? What are the arguments against them? Why do we need them? Besides to help the Liberal Party, do we need them on ASX boards and executive leadership teams? Is it quota for gender or quotas for cultural diversity? Or would one of either actually help all forms of diversity? So things we'll discuss today. And once we confidently answer all of those questions and have an excellent plan for solving Australia's diversity issues across a wide spread of different sectors, we'll move on to how we can get paid more.
Sounds like a plan.
Because
why not? We'll be
so,
chatting all week.
Yeah, we won't. We'll keep it to a good half an hour.
We can solve the world's problems really quickly.
Starting now. So, as we are recording, the Liberal Party is grappling with its, and I'll use quotes here, its problem with women. Shivani, I saw you tweet yesterday that really it's a problem with men, and we need to rethink the language that we're using there. So we know that 2 female Liberal MPs have announced they would not contest the next election due to bullying in the party. Just 6 women have been pre-selected for safe Liberal seats. That was what AAP was reporting yesterday for the next election. And we know that women already make up less than a quarter of the Liberal Party. Now, I didn't want to focus this conversation 100% on the Liberal Party. That's, I guess, where we can see the dire issue. But really to bring it up as an example of a broader discussion on quotas. So, Georgie, I might start with you. Do you think the Liberal Party needs quotas? But more broadly, how far should quotas go? Should they stem into business from there?
I think the answer to does the Liberal Party need quotas, I think if it wants to resolve the issue of representation of women, I can't see that happening without there being an actual mechanism to achieve that. And I think, if they want to call it a target because it makes them feel better, sure, do that. But I think if they want the numbers to change, they're going to have to do something. We know, the Labor Party is a very good example of what happens. They have had quotas and they've got 48% representation of women in their party, and it hasn't happened by accident. It hasn't happened quickly. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what does happen at the next federal election, because the predictions, obviously, if there's only 6 Liberal females in safe seats, and some of those safe seats, they're being called safe, but it's a 10% margin, and we've seen swings like that before. So, the prediction from one of the newspapers this week was that potentially there could be 5 Liberal women in Parliament after the next election. And
that might be next to very few men as well. So
potentially, that is true.
Let's put this in perspective.
Yes, I think that is good context. But I think what is going to be very interesting is because even now, even just yesterday, we had one of the ministers was on Sky News saying that actually, we don't have a problem with women. There've been a number of people who've come out, sort of party officials, saying things like, if women can't handle the heat, they should get out of the kitchen. There has been
a female party official saying that.
But also there's been actually another female, Helen Kroger, made a similar comment that and that has come up in relation to Julia Banks's remarks. There is that sort of, I think there is a level of denial within the Liberal Party about whether it is actually a problem, and I think what the next election is going to do is be very telling, because I cannot imagine that based on all of the current indicators, I think the representation of women is only going to get worse, and I think that'll be borne out in the election in the female voter numbers. So I think that I don't think the Liberal Party will impose quotas anytime soon, but I think perhaps one of the impetuses may well be an electoral wipeout.
Yeah, and after that, they'll look inwards. There'll be reports done. There'll be consultants hired, and that might be one of the solutions that they come up in terms of pre-selection for the next election.
Yeah, well, because and this is where quotas I think are useful in business as well, because it addresses the sort of structural problems. Because if there aren't any women at the top, we know that it becomes self-perpetuating because people recruit like for like. And so if you've got an organisation that has very few females at the top, it's really difficult for them to credibly send a message to, prospective employees, current employees, and that they actually support and nurture and will promote female talent. And I think that something that a quota does is it sort of enforces action. There's not a lack of women in leadership roles because there's a lack of women who are qualified. And I think what quotas do is that they overcome that.
What do you think, Shivani?
Could not agree more. I think that it's really quite sad that we have comments out there from people who should be, respected and governing our country. So you've got, Scott Morrison saying, I don't think quotas are a way of removing obstacles and we need a practical approach so that women can understand what's expected of them. And you've just got to look at that or listen to that. And what else do you do but just laugh and say, well, when are you going to wake up and, and smell the coffee here? Women completely understand what's expected of them. It's more so that we need intrinsic change in policy in the party, and we need to have some kind of targets or quotas, or call it affirmative action, whatever you'd like to call it, but we do need to have that change. And I think, Georgie, when you said they'll do it if the Liberal Party is serious enough about making that change and actually want to have a gender diverse party, I think you bang on, but I think in the end it'll also come down to an electorate wipeout as well, as you said, and people just saying, we won't vote for you unless you represent us. Because isn't it interesting? The government is there to represent us, represent our views, and to put that through into legislation, but yet they don't represent 50% of the population. So I think it's incredibly sad, and I think that some of the barriers that are coming through around let's put in quotas for the Liberal Party is also, really sad. So there was some talk recently in the last week around the Liberal Party would have been fine with quotas. It's just Labor did it first. And so now it's a term of, we can't do the same thing as them. We have to stand for something different. And so it's not even an argument of principles. It's not even an argument of doing what's right. It's about how do we differentiate from the Labor Party. And hang on a second, let's actually just do the right thing and differentiate by policies that are really needed. And we know the Liberal Party is, really known for their economic policy, for example. So differentiate through that, if you like, but make sure that you are representing women. And if you do have a problem with the name quotas, call it something else. Call it a target.
So they do say they have got a target. So they've got, but they're nowhere. It's impossible for them to reach that target. I think it's
50-50 by 2025.
Or is it 20? It might. I think it's 2025. So we're 7 years away. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
A lot of people have to give up their seats and a lot of men have to shift over to make it there. I almost think you'd be better off saying, let's have a 30% quota or something and get there that way in terms of their pre-selections. And then when it comes to the merit argument, because I'm frequently torn on quotas. I don't know where I stand, but I absolutely do stand on it for the Liberal Party, especially when it comes to pre-selection. And when people put up the argument around merit, it's like you put your candidate there, then the public will vote for them. That's how it works. So what is wrong with that at the pre-selection level?
I think also one of the things, so when I first became a business reporter, that was in 2008, and I remember when I first interviewed female CEOs and this subject of quotas came up, so this is 10 years ago. It was very rare for any sort of female on the record to say that they supported quotas. They were really, a lot of them just thought, no, this change is going to happen if there's enough intent. And I think ideally that would happen, but what we've seen now is it hasn't. And now I think more and more the events that I go to and the female leaders that I hear speak are sort of unequivocal. And I mean, Sam Mostyn is one example, and she has said sort of quite publicly, she was a quota appointment on the AFL Commission. And she's like, I'm proud of that, because if there hadn't have been a quota, I would not have been there. And then there wouldn't have been another woman after me, and then there wouldn't have been the changes that they've made. And I think that is something that I hear a lot now, because I mean, and I think a lot of people do recoil at the idea that no one wants to be a token appointment. But at the same time, No one wants no appointments.
But there's
No,
plenty of
not at all.
mateship appointments going on. We just don't call them token appointments. But it's like there's plenty of appointments where you got there because you're somebody's son or you're somebody's mate or you're in a certain faction of the party or, you know, they need a national to sit in that seat. So...
and also, I mean, I think we've probably talked about this before and said it before, but if you want to talk about merit, let's assess how politics has been for the last 5 or 10 years. Do we look at that and conclude that the current leaders that we have are doing an outstanding job? You know, are they creating constructive change? Are they introducing sort of innovative policies? Are they moving us forward? Because to me, it certainly doesn't feel that way. And I think that I would have more patience and tolerance for the argument of merit if I saw the group of leaders currently displaying sort of outstanding leadership, but we're not seeing that, and so then it's even more infuriating to be told, oh well, no, you have to achieve your position on merit.
Yeah, and to that point that you brought up, Shivani, that maybe the Liberal Party would have done it if the Labor Party hadn't done it first, which I think is this idea that destroys so much good policy out there because it's, well, they've done that, we can't possibly agree with it. We have to make all these disastrous changes to it just to try and make it really difficult for it to get through. And I wonder if having more women involved, having a more diverse parliament could actually try to dismantle part of that a little bit so that we're going for the best outcomes.
Well, it will, because if you think about how businesses work, right, and I like using this example because if we use a business example and we say, you know, we've got a company that's managing, you know, X billion dollars worth of P&L, well, then you've got the Australian economy, you know, times that by so much more. So we'll use a business example. In the business world, we know that when you've got a diverse organisation with women who are 50-50 at senior leadership and at board level, and I make that distinction because at board level, you're not actually making the decisions on the running of the company, so you must have 50% at senior leadership level as well. But when you do have that, these companies are outperforming others by almost 50% when it comes to profitability, productivity, employee morale. So to answer your question, would they have a better governing party? Would they have better leadership, Georgie? Yeah, they would. They absolutely would, because history tells us so. We can actually go back and say, yeah, that'd work. There's also something else that I think needs to be unpacked. I mean, first of all, you know, if the Liberal Party aren't coming to the party, so to speak, around quotas because, you know, Labor got there first, they're sort of, you know, cutting their nose to spite themselves, really, aren't they? Because they really are feeling the downward effects of that. With so many women leaving and the cultural issues around not supporting women. So you've got that. But the second thing is, I think they need to look at really critically the difference between targets and quotas. And like you said, around consultants, just to affect some really good change management around things. So when Frydenberg talked about we're going to get to 50-50, and I do think it was 2025 that he said that through retention and mentoring and so forth.
Oh, it's so patronising.
Oh, my God.
Through mentoring. I mean, what? Oh, who's going to mentor these women?
Yeah. Are there any women who've done it before that are actually going to stick around?
Well, are there any men who are worth their time to be mentored by in this party?
And take the women seriously enough, because the WhatsApp, chat messages, show us already that, Julie Bishop wasn't even sort of considered when they were talking about, who they're going to vote for. So are there any men that would back a woman enough?
Why on earth would you consider, your most popular alternative who has got an incredibly successful track record? Why would you consider her when you've got a whole lot of other men with more merit?
Who had, better news poll ratings than, Turnbull at the time too. I know, it defies belief, right? Why would you do it? So, I think some of those things really need to be unpacked. And so, the 50-50 is not going to happen because they're nowhere near there. And this is where targets and quotas differ. So with targets, it's like with any business where, the three of us can say, right, we've got a target of doing 3 podcasts a week and we're going to do that every single week. And we get to the end of the year and we go, well, how did you go? And, we failed pretty miserably. We only did like 1 a week or something. And businesses do that, and then you've got KPIs around it. And depending on your management, you can do that really well and you can get results. Quotas, the key difference there is that there's going to be some penalties in place if you didn't do it. And if you didn't do it, you've got someone who legislates it, so usually Parliament will legislate it. So you'd need to have some, outside, group created to do that. But, there would be a penalty if they didn't have it. And so getting back to my first point, effective change management around this would be, okay, we're going to set a target within the party, and in 5 years' time, that's going to turn into a quota. So we've got 5 years to pull up our socks, for example, get the house in order, because we know there's going to be penalties soon. And that's how a good business would do it too. If they want to move to a quota system, move to a target system first, so you've got effective change management, small doses of change, and then you move in. You know,
and that's
bring
kind
in
of
the,
what's going on with the ASX, I guess, as well.
Totally.
So pushing that, but isn't much talk of it moving to quotas necessarily. So, but that was kind of the idea from my mind and from the outset. It's like, this is really giving you that opportunity to try and get your shit together to reach these targets, because if you don't, then we're talking penalties and we're talking legislating and we're talking various other things that will happen along the line, which you might not like. So, definitely to give it that opportunity that you do it yourself without the stick coming down on you.
Yeah.
I was interviewing someone who works in quite a senior role in business at the moment in tech, and I was talking to him about diversity, and he made a comment that, I mean, in some ways it's, of course, he made a sporting analogy, but it was actually quite clever. And he said to me, he talks to people when they don't buy into the, you know, diversity argument about how important it is. He says, you know, you think about something like a cricket team. In any sporting team, there are not always going to be the 11 single best batters, you know, in the country at any given time, because to have the team work together, you need to have, and I don't even particularly know that much about cricket, but you need to have batters, you need to have bowlers, you need to have, you know, fielders, you need all-rounders, you need thinkers. And he said, so at any point in time, the team that you have, the best team, is not the 11 single best players. It's the 11 players who together have got the necessary skills that are needed. And I think of that when I look in Parliament, and I think it's really hard to bring it down to individual sort of merit, because ideally we want our, you know, Parliament to represent the population.
Yes.
And part of that is looking and saying, if our party is made up of 3/4 men and only 1/4 women, that's not representative. And so even if we had the best men in the world, they're giving us their worldview. It's one perspective.
It's groupthink.
It is. And the reality is we need, in every setting, whether it's in a business, whether it's in, you know, a classroom, whether it's in Parliament, you need the variety of perspectives to get the benefits.
Yes, you do, which is why diverse companies, diverse organisations and a diverse government would do well.
Yeah. So we're talking diversity in a gender sense at the moment, but what about quotas at a cultural level as well? Would that work? Could that work? What would that look like? Or if we focus on gender, will that help us get more cultural diversity? What do you think?
I think you've got to focus on both. And you know, coming from, obviously I'm a woman and I'm an Indian woman. Growing up in corporate Australia, I didn't see a lot of women, period. I was working in banking and finance, and so I use the analogy that whenever we'd go to a conference and you'd go to the ladies would be, you know, the door would be swinging in and out, and because there were so few of us, and the line for the men's would just snake all the way around the conference room because there were so many of them. So there was very few women, and out of those women, there was very few women from cultural backgrounds. And you really need to work on your bias in order to promote women from cultural backgrounds, just as you do to promote women, period. Because what you're doing is you're looking at, you know, your to use when I go into geek mode, which I love to do a lot, as you know, Angela. You go into your system one thinking, which is, you know, survival, right? We meet someone, we automatically have to make a stereotype about them so that we can quickly move on and relate to them. And so we, through a system one type thinking, would meet an Asian woman and think, okay, well, she's going to be quite subversive. She's, you know, she's going to be, you know, really conscientious, and she's going to listen to my instructions, but she's probably not going to be a leader. Now, system two thinking, which is when you actually slow yourself down and actually challenge some of those assumptions and talk to them and, you know, flesh out the information you've got from them. I mean, you'll know that it's probably not right, and you've got, you know, a really ambitious, capable, skilled woman, but you need to be conscious about that. You need to slow down your thinking. How do you do that? Through structures, systems, targets, and so forth. So the only way you're going to get a diverse set of people in your organisation is to also set a target around that, because all you're doing really is being kind to yourself and saying, hey, I'm human, I'm fallible, I make assumptions about people. This shouldn't be such a dirty word. I make it about people all the time, and I need to create a structure for my human self to slow down and look at people as they are and how they should be hired. This reminds me of, you know, my time in corporate world. And I had 3 openings in my team, and I was hiring for a group of people, and so these people were going to, according to the company trajectory, they wanted these people to be eventually groomed into junior financial advisors, from there into senior financial advisors, and so on and so forth. There was a little bit of talk around we don't have enough women in financial advice, and so I'm here, managing the entry level, the entry point, right? I've got 3 openings, and so I said to my senior leadership team, there are 3 openings. I'm going to make sure that 1 or 2 of them go to women. That means I'm going to have to wait to get the right CV, and that's how you do merit the right way.
Yeah.
I had to wait 3 months. And it wasn't me just saying tokenistically to the recruiters, well, make sure you give me 1 female in your CV stack to me. And then I go to the leadership team and go, well, I told them to give me at least 1 female CV. And hey, she wasn't that great. That's not good enough, And so I told them to work their networks really hard. It took me 3 months. I ended up finding a really, really good female candidate. She was over 50 years old, and she was ridiculously qualified. I felt like I hit the jackpot.
Did you get a lot of female CVs in that process?
No, I didn't. I had to search for it. I had to hunt for it, and I did it because I put a structure
you had
around
a recruiter.
I had a
helping you?
recruiter.
And
yeah.
were they annoyed at the request or the fact that you kept asking for female CVs, or do you think they were used to it?
They're used to it, and to a lot of organisations' credit, everyone's saying we want good female talent. There's a female drought out there for good talent. So women listening, get out there and blast down those doors. But
sorry, which sector? In the finance?
In finance.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. The big banks are all saying, we want to hire good quality women, with the right skill set. So, they were used to that, and they just really struggled getting those candidates in. And so I think, just looking back, I used to get like 5 CVs in one email, so they'd bulk their emails to me, and 4 of them would be men and 1 of them would be a woman, and I would just have to keep waiting and keep
Is there
pushing
anything
it
in the
through.
language of the job ad that might be turning women off or preventing them from applying rather than turning them off, I guess?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point that you make that. Yes, there is. And there have been some, interesting studies done around this where you can, create a job ad, and the way that you word it means that, men will generally look at the criteria for the job and go, I've got about, 4 out of those 10 things, I think I'll go for it. And a woman would say, I think I've got about 6 of those 10 things, I don't think I'm quite ready yet. So you just need to be a little bit more open in your language to say that we'll support you if you don't have these things, we've got mentoring for you. And the language does change the applicant criteria. Come to think of it, we actually did make some changes to our job ad to get more female applicants in the end.
This is a commercial break for Work It Out. We'll be back in a moment. But if you're interested in being a sponsor for Work It Out or Women's Agenda, just drop us a line and let us know. That's womensagenda.com.au.
Maybe we should move on. We solved it.
We did. We solved it. The only thing that I would add, and I agree with you, Shivani, completely about the creating cultural diversity. I think if you want to create any type of diversity, you have to be intentional about it. So I don't think that just sort of trying to get more women in will solve the sort of lack of cultural diversity in organisations. And similarly with age. I think ageism is a real problem. And I think if you don't sort of intentionally think about unpacking some of those assumptions, you won't get a diverse age range in your workforce.
Yeah, and the age thing can also become, that can then be a triple whammy for many women, especially if you take time out of the workforce, and if you take for an extended period to either to work part-time or to look after kids, and you're trying to get back in. And I recently looked at some data around this, and it was really concerning how much what I would perceive to be very young women, nobody should be experiencing this anyway, were coming up against ageism and coming up against concern that they were already so out of the loop in terms of their skill set that they'd never be able to return to their industry or their jobs. And some had been out of the workforce 10, 12 years. Some had been out of the workforce 18 months, 2 years, and they're talking in kind of a tech or a STEM environment, how they already felt like they were being left behind, and how, I should have been studying while I was off on mat leave. It's like, you've got enough on.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to pay rises. So another little problem we will solve right now. So we know that women currently earn 14% less than men, according to the current national gender pay gap. At its lowest point in 20 years, but that has hovered between 14 and 18% over the past 2 decades. And it has actually gone down to 14% previously and come back up again. So it's no measure of progress necessarily. The figure can extend out significantly when it comes to certain industries and also when you factor in bonuses. So we also know that the gender pay gap starts at a graduate level, with some research finding female graduates are starting on $5,000 less than men, so that will accumulate over time. Shivani, I got to share a panel with you recently and this question came up in the audience and I thought you did an amazing job on answering it and providing some really practical ideas on what women can do. Of course, it's not women's responsibility to fix this, but it's something we can do, and obviously we need organisations and people on the other end of the negotiating table to also pay attention to their own biases that might be coming out of this. But what are some of your tips and how do you support and help women in your community get pay rises and get what they are deserved?
Yeah, we looked at this and, of course, the gender pay gap. And when I started The Remarkable Woman, the gender pay gap was up at about 17.6%. And so like you, I'm, rejoicing around, the 14.6% now, but at the same time going, oh, well, it bounces. And some of the things that I thought really critically about was, how do we, at a grassroots level, close the gender pay gap? And the most powerful thing you can do is to create change for yourself. And so at The Remarkable Woman, I decided, well, we're going to arm women with strategies. We're actually going to coach them on how to renegotiate their salaries. Because, of course, I used to be a financial planner and I don't shy away from talking money. And I think it's incredibly important that we represent ourselves well. So be your strongest representative at the negotiating table. So we do that. And, some of the strategies that I share with women, first of all, is name it. Get in there and book a meeting with your manager and tell them that you would like to have a salary discussion. And make sure you've got the right time and place to do it. If you're running, into them in the hallway, don't sort of eyeball them there and go, hey, we need to talk pay. Make sure it's at the right time. You could even send them an email and say, hi, could we have a chat next week? I'd like to review a number of things. Make sure salary is not just one of them. So it could be something that you give to them. So I want to chat about the project that we've been working on. I want to talk about how I can add some value. I want to do a bit of a review on the last 6 months and what we've achieved so far. And I also want to talk about my salary and things that we could do to increase it.
So put it out from the outset, because I think,
Totally.
my instinct would be to have the meeting and then in the meeting mention the salary. So, put out this sort of mystery meeting that I want to talk to you, but you're saying if you give them a little bit of a heads up first,
yes,
that can help your situation.
Yeah, because you've got to be outcomes orientated. So remember, the whole point you're having this conversation for is to get more money, right? And the reason why most people will, so I'll defend you here, Angela, the reason why most people will kind of go, oh, I'll just say it in the meeting.
Yeah, because I hate talking about money.
Yeah.
So I don't even want to write it out there. So
exactly, and it takes away some of the anxiety for you. You know that he or she wasn't thinking about it for a whole week before you walked into your boss's office. But by doing that, you're giving them ample time to think about it as well. And then what you're doing is you're making sure that you've got a space where you can get the answer, which is yes. And then when you're there, start to build a case for why you deserve it. So I talk about monetizing it and valuing it and also doing your research. So the monetizing part is do some research and this is so important, by the way. I say this, I feel like a broken record because I've said this to so many of my friends and they go off and do it and I go, did you monetize it? So please, ladies and gents listening to this, because it applies for everyone, make sure you monetize it by going back and having a look at how much value you've added to your organization. What have you done by way of sales, by way of productivity that has made the organization more money or saved them more money? Create a tally list. When you create a list, it's evidence. Evidence is indisputable and businesses love it, especially if it's on Excel or something like that. So I would do a little line item. I did a podcast and that created marketing interest of X, Y, and Z. I did, I went in and did a presentation. It meant that you didn't have to hire someone. I saved you a speaking fee of $5,000. All of that, put it in there. I worked back and I saved, you hiring another part-time employee, that saves you a salary of X amount. So that's what I mean by valuing it. Then you want to time it as well. So timing is interesting. So if you work in a non-productive role, what I mean by that is productivity roles are really easy to talk about salary because you're generating sales, you're selling something, you're creating a product. If you work in a service-based industry, time it by your hours. Then the biggest secret sauce of getting a pay rise is you anchor it. And you've actually got to get in there and say, and so as a result of all of these things, I believe that I deserve, and you throw in the number. If you feel uncomfortable, hold your breath like you
Name
used to.
it and stay attached to it.
I think I deserve an extra $20,000. What I'd like to do now is talk to you about how we can make that happen. And then just live with the silence.
Don't talk through the silence.
Don't talk through the silence.
That's a great negotiating tactic, because I think we can be quite compelled just to start talking as soon as we hear that silence. So we just want to feel it. And then by feeling it, we're talking ourselves out of it. Because
you're talking them out of it.
Yeah.
You are, because you start going, oh, but look, if you're uncomfortable, or, and what women tend to do as well is they don't represent themselves well. And they'll start negotiating against themselves by saying, and look, I also know that now's not the right time, but look, I get that, that project we did last time didn't work, but... So what I'd say is, don't say the 3-letter word but. Don't negotiate against yourself, because you're making it easy for them to object. Just live with the silence and see what happens.
Yep, anchor it and live with the silence. Georgie, do you have anything to add there?
I'm just thinking, it terrifies me so much, even listening to this, and I'm not even in a job where this. That's I'm not in a company or anything like that where that could happen, but it just terrifies me. And I think it's amazing advice. I think I also actually, when I was thinking about it when I was listening to you speak, Shivani, about the recruitment is so expensive for businesses, and it's one of those things that comes up particularly when you look into the sort of business case for parental leave, for example. It is a no-brainer for companies to pay for that, because they save so much money by keeping a staff member on, versus if you look into what it costs to replace a staff member. And I think if you sort of can weave those numbers into somehow your case study, because the organisation would be better off paying you however much you need if it avoids them the cost of losing you, and
especially if they've been struggling to find that female CV for months, as you were.
Exactly.
So there's a little added incentive there. But I know that for me, in the past, when I now run my own business, so I'm not really in that situation, but I do have certain things asking for money from clients, and that there's other things that and maybe another time we need to look at that in terms of small business owners or female entrepreneurs, in terms of pricing your time effectively. But in the past, when I've worked with different organisations, one of the quickest times that I've been able to anchor the salary and really go for something much higher than I ever thought I could go for was as soon as I found out that a man was earning a lot more than me in exactly the same position. It's amazing how quickly you get your meeting and you make it happen. And I was at the point saying, no, I want to discuss this afternoon, whereas previously I would have put it off. But as soon as I knew, I felt so uncomfortable and so horrible that was happening, and that I felt ashamed almost that I'd somehow enabled this to happen. But it's amazing how quickly it happens, and it's amazing how quickly an employer does step up to the plate, well, at least should step up to the plate on that.
They do, because they don't want to lose you, and you're a good person. And what I would say is, if you don't have the luxury of finding out what your colleagues are earning, and not a lot of people will, especially if you're not in HR, and I say that because I coached an amazing woman who's in HR and wanted a pay rise. She got $17,000 more at the end of it, but because she was in HR, she realised that her organisation had paid her $13,000 more, their absolute highest point threshold, just to keep her. So good negotiation works. But if you don't have the luxury of the access to that kind of information, you don't find out, by the by, that such and such is earning more than you, what I'd say is compete against yourself and know that you are undervaluing yourself unless you're being paid your worth. And a good way to get that kind of confidence is to do a little bit of market research. Hop onto PayScale, hop onto Seek, hop onto Indeed, find out what other people are paying for your role. Hell, apply for a couple too, because it'll give you a great brazen level of confidence knowing that you've got something, out there if you don't get the money that you deserve. And you'll start to feel like you did, Angela, where you're like, no, this afternoon we're having a chat. I'm not letting this go.
Yep, exactly. Okay, we should move on. So 2 big issues solved there. Thank you, Shivani. Thank you, Georgie. But we will finish off with a recommend. Oh, sorry, did you have something to add on?
No, I just wanted to say that if there's anyone listening who sort of actions this, I'd love to hear from you. I mean, I just think it's very practical, good advice, and I think it would probably legitimately garner a better outcome.
Yeah, exactly. You can check out The Remarkable Woman as well. So that's the business that Shivani runs. So because you've got resources on there that would help with this, but also just following your content and things like that. And we'll try and get a bit of it published on Women's Agenda. So because it is really excellent. It's so straightforward. You've just sort of summed it up in a nice sort of 6-minute spiel there, which is really nice. So
happy to help.
So we should finish on a recommendation, something you're reading or watching or listening to at the moment. Georgie, do you want to go first?
I will. So I recently read a book called 100 Years of Dirt, and it's written by Rick Morton, who is a journalist.
You went to his book launch, didn't you?
I did.
Yep.
And he's a writer he's a journalist at The Australian, and he actually does amazing work, particularly around the NDIS, but his reporting is really good. But it is a memoir of his and sort of details growing up when he was 6 and his brother had a horrible accident on their farm, and then his parents' marriage broke down very quickly after that, and then he and his mum and the 3 kids were his 4-week-old sister. They were in Housing Commission in central Queensland, and it was a really difficult time. And he writes this book, and he was very, very bright, obviously, and he got the scholarship to Bond University, so he sort of managed to get himself out of the poverty that his mum still lives in. And it's a beautifully written book. It's an amazing story, but it really made me think, and when we were talking about quotas before, that's why I was reminded of it, because he sort of said, even in Australia, when we talk about quotas and targets, the kinds of people that end up benefiting tend to mostly come from middle class or upper class backgrounds. And it's when you read a book like this, you realise how difficult it is if you do not have access to sort of a financial safety net that can help you through uni, that can sort of help you do those unpaid internships. Without that, it is so difficult to get ahead. And he is an amazing writer, and I highly recommend it for a lot of different reasons, but it really did make me think of that. And I thought, even when we do see women in leadership roles, and even culturally diverse women in leadership roles, they tend to have come from really comfortable backgrounds, and that's not a slur on them, because it's been incredibly difficult for them to get the positions they've had anyway. But it did sort of make me think about that other component to diversity that we don't have.
Yeah. I think that's the 4th recommendation I've heard for that book. So
I cannot tell you how good it is. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Shivani.
I'm going to pick it up. So I read a book a couple of years back that still stays with me. I actually want to talk about a TV show, but then after hearing how deep you went, I was like, I've got something deep too. I'll run with that. All That I Am by Anna Funda. Brilliant book, and it's set in a time between World War I and World War II, and the lead character Dora is just phenomenal. She's so incredibly embodied and empowered, and runs these campaigns of awareness, and for the rights and the protection of Jews, and to make sure that good literature is out there to be read. And just how forthright and brazen she is. There's a great, thing around seeing is believing, and you need role models. When you read a book like that, you sort of go, I want to be her. I want to be as courageous and as fearless as her. So that stays with me. I recommend it as often as I can. But if I can very quickly throw in there, Matthew Rhys just won the Emmy for Best Actor for The Americans. And I have recently binged on that. And I love it for reasons that I just can't explain. I may have a little crush on him. That may be one of the reasons. But look, it's a great show, and if you haven't watched it, I'd highly recommend it.
Great.
Yes,
okay.
I haven't. I loved it, and I haven't watched the last 2 seasons yet. I sort of got distracted off it, so I've got to. It's
I always hear Annabelle Crabb and Lee Sowers talking about it on their podcast, and I think I've got to get into it.
Yeah, it is.
And I think they had a whole episode dedicated to a series of it, and I actually listened to it.
Well, see, that's the only episode of theirs I haven't listened to, because I'm like, I don't want to listen to
you
it
don't want the
until
spoilers.
after I've watched it. So.
Okay.
And then let's set up a little WhatsApp group where we can compare notes.
I'm going to do a quick one. So it's, and I'm going to get my hands on this book this afternoon because I believe it's sitting at the office waiting for me. It's The Mental Load, and it's a feminist comic by Emma. I don't know her surname. I think maybe she just goes by Emma, but you might remember it from a few years ago when she did this this comic that went viral that had the theme of You Should Have Asked. And it pictures, the woman kind of picking up all this stuff around the house, various things going wrong, and she's trying to get life and kids and stuff organised, and, somebody kind of sitting on the couch watching them and everything falls to a disaster. He says, you should have just asked for help. And the whole point being, I shouldn't have to ask for help. I don't have to manage you as well as, manage everything else that's going on. So it's about the mental load that women come across. So it's been turned into a book, and I don't know how that works or what that looks like. It is in the office, so I will take some photos and we'll put it out there on Women's Agenda as well. I think it will be really interesting. So that's a recommendation for me, and I think that's a wrap from us. Thank you, Shivani. Awesome advice. We have to get you in here more often. And thank you, Georgie.
Thank you.
Thank you to Eagle Waves Radio. It's awesome to be in this new studio here. And a reminder that we publish Women's Agenda every day. We put out news stories from our small team every day just before lunch. So if you haven't signed up for our newsletter, please do womensagenda.com.au/subscribe. Thank you.
That's a wrap for Talk It Out, the Women's Agenda podcast, powered by Eagle Waves Radio. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and jump on the website for more amazing shows. Catch you next time.